5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, my name's Duncan. I'm from Back Away from the Donkey, and I'm here with Al from Big Al Does BookTube, and we're going to talk on Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Warning, there will be lots of spoilers for the book and probably for the film Blade Runner while we're in there, so if you've not seen the film or read the book, go off and do that now. That's what I say.
Yes, you're compelled to, because they're fantastic.
Yes, compelled to. So, we're obviously doing this because you just recently read it, and it's nice to... I always worry when people read books I love, and I think, are they going to like that? Or
I had my socks blown off, Duncan. I'm going to be honest. I didn't think this had a shot at being as good as it was. I felt like I would really appreciate the themes and maybe the prose, but my love for the movie Blade Runner, which has been born over the last 30 years of watching the movie over and over and over in different formats and editions and re-releases, would just be too strong, and the source material would not be able to overpower those thoughts and feelings. But I actually think the book is better than the movie, and that's my favorite movie of all time. So I don't know what that says about my love for movies compared to my love for books, because I thought I'm probably a bigger movie fan than I was book fan. I maybe don't believe that anymore, because this book really blew my socks off. It's got to be up there in my top 5 reads of all time, probably. As that's a spoiler for for later videos I may make. But yeah, I was shocked at how good this book
have
is.
You ever
I'll
read
let you
any
talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, have you ever read any of his stuff before?
No, not at all. I own A Scanner Darkly and is it Man in High Castle?
Yeah, Man in High Castle.
Yes. So I own those 2 books, and I didn't know what book to go to first out of the 3, but I wanted to read Philip K. Dick this year. I didn't want to put him off. He's one of like 7 or 8 authors that I absolutely must get to soon. And now the issue is, anytime I read a book as good as this by an author, is that I want to pick up another book.
Yeah.
And I really want to read some other authors that are really high up on my Ray Bradbury is probably the next highest up on my list of people I want to read. But it's hard to think past this now, because I know how books like Ubik are held in such high regard.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to think past Philip K. Dick at the moment, because this book was so good.
Yeah, I think to go to books like Ubik and Divine Invasions, you need to have read a lot of his earlier stuff.
Yeah,
because that's when he was being spoken to by God, apparently. So it gets even more unhinged than some of the later stuff. Because my history with Philip K. Dick was, I saw Blade Runner when it was released in '82, and I went with a friend of mine, and my friend absolutely hated it, and I loved it. And then I went off and brought the book. I actually went off and brought that copy of the book, that original copy of the book. I now own numerous copies like that one. And
that's my favorite.
But I went off and read the book, and the book was like, okay, this is nothing really like the film. But the film's a type. I've got numerous copies of the film as well. I picked up. I've got VHSs. That's the better one. That's the. I will always argue that and then I've got this ridiculous tin with every cut of the film in. I will always argue the fact that the theatrical version is the best version, but that's another story. Much to everybody's annoyance, because I think it gives the noir feel to it. Because I Rosie, my wife, I got her to watch it. She'd never seen the film before, and we watched probably the final cut, and she didn't like it. And then later on, about a year later, I wanted to watch it, and I watched the theatrical one, and she watched that and liked it a lot more, because to her it made more sense with the voiceover.
Yeah, the original is the only version I saw for a long time, because obviously the final, the director's cut and the final cut came out much later. And having only watched it in VHS form for so long, I do feel like the visuals work really. It's one of those things, like, there are a lot of movies when I go back and watch on VHS, it doesn't work. I can't unsee all the things I want to see in HD, or cleaned up audio and cleaned up visuals.
Yeah.
But Blade Runner works perfectly in both for me. I feel like what Ridley Scott filmed translates beautifully to 4K and Dolby surround sound, but it also works equally in a different way in VHS form because it almost adds to the atmosphere.
The standard definition and the slight shakiness
like
of
you
the
say,
screen.
the narration and some of the shots work so well in that it's almost kind of washed out, murkier feel of VHS. It almost adds to the kind of like feel of it. The kind of, because for me, like that movie, it captured the noir side of this story.
Yeah.
Because there is definitely an element of Philip K. Dick was completely off of his rocker when he wrote this book. But somewhere in there, he had read a Dashiell Hammett novel or something, and he wanted to write like a noir, but he went completely off the reservation in doing so.
Yeah.
I feel like Ridley Scott sees that maybe this was the basis of this story originally, and he's kind of brought that back a little bit.
I know Philip K. Dick saw the film before, because he died before it was released, but he saw a cut of the film just before. Originally, when it was being adapted, he hated the idea of it being adapted. And then he saw the cut of it and he said, it's like somebody's delved inside my brain visually for the visuals of it, which I always thought, well, if you've done a film and an awful lot of Philip K. Dick says that, you're doing a good job.
Yeah, definitely. There's no way you can make this book into a movie.
No.
Really. You could try to make it into like a 3-part miniseries with an incredibly high budget that no one will watch and understand. You could do that, but it'd be pointless. If you want to make money and make a movie, then what Ridley Scott did was probably the only way to do it.
Yeah. As I was saying, I wrote down last night the plot of this. I had to go through the book and interject if I missed something, okay? So it starts off with Rick Deckard is a bounty hunter, a married bounty hunter. This is set in 1992, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
It does that,
space 1999 thing of assuming that we're going to be somewhere completely
He wants to get enough money to buy a real sheep, because he owns an electric sheep at the time. So to do this, he needs to kill at least 5 androids. He is given a job to kill 6 who have escaped. So he tests the Voight-Kampff test, which is this test if nobody's ever, I'm assuming anybody watching this knows what it is anyway. It's to test empathy. So he tests it on Rachel, who's a niece of Eldon Rose, who's the manufacturer of Nexus 6. Because he was named, it's Terrell in the film, isn't it? Yes.
Yes.
Well, I mean, so basically he proves that Rachel is an android. Next we have Deckard goes off, he kills one of the androids, Polakov, and then he tries to kill another one who's not pressing it, called Luba Luft. She calls the police. This is when it gets really unhinged.
Oh, so good.
The police have never heard of him, so they arrest him for murder, basically. And the police are operating for a totally different police station that he's never heard of or seen before. And he realizes that the captain of the police is a guy called Garland, who's actually one of the androids on his list that he needs to kill. And he meets another bounty hunter there who interviews him, called Phil Reich, who's I think it's Reich or some Reich, or
a
bounty hunter who's confused because he's never heard of Deckard's station. But it all comes to a fine, and it ends up that Reich actually kills Garland, but he actually seems to enjoy the killing. And they escape together, and then they kill Luba Luft in an art gallery. Where we are. Page 2. Oh, sorry, wrong page. Sorry, it's getting confusing because it was, when I was writing this down, was just like, okay. Yes. Then we have another android called Pris, who moves in with a mutant called Isidore, basically. And then joining him later is Roy and Ingrid Batty, which is Roy is obviously the Rutger Hauer character. Deckard goes off and puts a deposit down for a goat randomly. And then he arranges to meet Rachel in a hotel. there's a TV chat show with this prophet come
Buster Friendly.
person called Mercer, who goes up this hill and
Mercer.
gets...
Okay, I thought you were talking about Buster for a minute.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not even mentioned Buster in this thing. I thought this gets Mercer, who's like this prophet come what have you, and he gets stoned going up a hill, and people use this empathy thing to hold on to, which Deckard's wife used a lot, to feel what he feels. But it all comes out that this guy is a fraud and he's not a real prophet. Yes. Deckard then goes off to kill the remaining androids, but then he has a vision from Mercer. Okay. And so he has a vision from Mercer. He goes off and kills basically Roy and Batty, and then basically book finishes with Rachel killing his goat by pushing off the top of a building. But in the meantime, Deckard finds a toad.
Yeah.
And he takes his toad home, and then he finally realizes it's electric. And that's basically, I've missed huge chunks out of it, but that is basically the story, which sounds totally what the hell is going on.
Yeah, it is crazy. But it's also completely genius.
Yeah, it makes sense when you're reading it.
Because, like, every scene, if you take it scene by scene, so it starts, he's arguing with his wife.
Yeah.
And they're talking about, he wants a new pet and it might help their relationship because he'll be happier and stuff, and they want to use the empathy box. It's such a great piece of social commentary that they have around, self-medication and mental health issues and how it affects our, interpersonal dynamics in a relationship, like a marriage.
Yeah.
Like you can take lithium, it might make you feel happier.
Yeah.
But really, are you living the same experience with your partner? Are you having the same empathetic cycle that you would have normally? And every scene is just as deep as the one I just described.
Yeah.
But it's shown to you in such obscure terms. It's like the whole scene with Phil Resch or Resch, I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, no,
was so interesting to me on so many levels, because throughout the story, you obviously get the Voight-Kampff test, which is supposed to determine who is an android and who is not. But the subject of like false negatives comes up, false positives comes up rather, because he's initially told that Rachel, the test doesn't work, right? He's told the test doesn't work because Rachel's real, which that does not happen in the movie. That's completely different to what happens in the movie. And they try to discredit the test, and he's worried now that he's been killing real people and stuff. And then, it really gets in his head when he meets, obviously, Phil, because like Phil thinks he's real, and they're both looking at each other like, well, which one of us is the android? Because we can't both be real, or maybe we are both
tests,
real.
And Phil Resch is using a different test to test empathy. Which I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but
no, it's the previous test they're still using, right?
Yes, that was it.
Yeah, that's right. The second of the 3 tests that they came up with. But what's really, really interesting to me is the Buster Friendly stuff. So later on, it's revealed that Buster Friendly isn't a human being. He's been around for like 100 years. He's making the same episode. He never gets any older. And everyone's thought he was real, a human all this time for some apparent reason. But they're trying to play with the idea is that maybe there are no humans left. That's like with the introduction of the toad as well at the end, which he assumes that is real. Is like maybe they're all androids but at different stages, and maybe humans have left and colonized other planets, and the idea is just to keep subverting the reader all the time and keeping them on their toes, so that Philip K. Dick can explore these themes of like, what is it to be human, is perception reality? Because obviously, like you said, he starts to see Mercer, right? He starts to see like he gets flashbacks of Mercer, but by this point he's already told that Mercer is fake. So how is he getting these flashbacks? Why is he seeing it? Why is he having this recall? I'll let you talk for a minute, but I've got some interesting things to say about Mercerism as well in a sec.
Yeah. Well, the thing about, as far as I feel, is he's obviously trying to get an animal to prove that he's human, to prove his humanity. Because in this, the androids are really obviously androids because they really have no empathy at all. They
especially
look at
towards
people,
animals, yeah.
Yeah, they look at people as things to manipulate, like the way Isidore's manipulated. Whereas in the book, in the film, there's a very fine line to what is human and what's not, because you can't really tell by the way Bat is and the way he wants to live in the film, sorry. And then you've got all the use. His wife is obsessed by using the mood organ to like commune with Mercer. And the question is, if they need this to make them feel, are they actually human?
Yes.
If they need to go onto this mood organ, something like this to make them feel real, that all questions, whether they are human or what is humanity anyway.
Yeah.
Because the Mercerism is just quite. I remember the first time I read it, I was really confused by it. And I still am quite confused by it because it's.
I think I've got it in my head. I think I know what he's going for, but I could be wrong. I'm going to throw it out there in a minute, but I might be wrong.
But yeah, the whole thing about it to me is he's trying to prove all the way through this that he's human. And that's the whole point of the book. It's not like the film is more of I suppose it's more of a chase film, isn't it? Because he's chasing after people constantly.
Yeah, it feels like a noir, if you took away all of the craziness, it seems like quite a simple crime book, a noir, like a 1940s maybe.
But yeah, to me, that's the whole thing. Is the subtext is that it's about empathy and what is to be human. But that's what Dick explored through most of his books. There's all elements of this. I think he's one of these authors that really spent the whole of his career writing about the same thing. There's one of his short stories that actually caused a lot of problems. I think it's called The Non-Humans. I might have the title wrong. And it's this idea about abortion that children are not real until they're about 6 years of age. So before they're technically, you could abort them. And this got people really riled up because they thought it was an anti-abortion message. And what the message was is, where do you define what is a human being?
Where does individuality come from? Yeah,
and that's what the story is more about than that. And I think people got carried away with that message. And I think he was subtle, but he didn't. I think if a writer tried to do something like that nowadays, they'd get absolutely pillared. But he just wrote from how he was feeling. I don't think he planned that much. It was all sort of stream of consciousness, but he suffered from mental illnesses, paranoia. He got better towards the back end of his life, but he was convinced that Thomas Dish was a big friend of his, and he actually accused him of working for the FBI at one point because he thought the FBI were spying on him.
Sounds like a Scanner Darkly.
Yeah. He had at one point in his house, he had all these people in there, all these drug addicts in there. He was just totally unhinged. And I think it all stemmed down to mental illness. I think he just suffered from mental illness the whole of his life. And he used drugs at some point to cover it up and his paranoia. But towards the back end of his life, he managed to sort of not recover, but managed to handle it a lot better. His daughter was saying that towards, the last sort of year of his life, he was really stable. And it was just sort of unfortunate because I can't remember. He died of a heart attack. It was a heart attack, just quite suddenly without no clues. But yes, I always think that in some ways, he was because he was struggling so much with his own mental health. That's why he was exploring what it was to be human, because he half the time didn't know what was real and what wasn't real.
It's an interesting subject, though.
Yeah, there's about 4 or 5 non-science fiction books he wrote. They were released. Bar Diary of a Crap Artist, the rest of them were released after he died, and is puttering around in a small land, which is literally about a man who works in a Radio Shack. That's all the story is about, and those are quite interesting because it's almost his perception of. So this is what real reality is. If you look at it in the sort of body of all his work. But I could be just getting incredibly pretentious about all this. I
don't think anything is put down without a lot of subtext.
He's one of these authors that you need to look at the body of his work rather than just the single books, I think. Usually think androids can be a gateway drug for a lot of people, do androids. And then when you start going down all the little premises, and then you start... there's a really good autobiography of him, which is an incredibly entertaining read. I will put I don't know where it still is. I'll put a link to it down below the video, actually, for people to have a look at. And that's called Divine Invasions. And that you see what goes on. You don't see what goes on, you hear part of the history. And when you read that, and it sort of puts a lot of the books into context.
Yeah. It's interesting you say about his struggles with mental health and his ability to perceive what we see as reality, because I think it's draws parallels with J.R. Isildur in the book, in that he's seen as a mutant and a lesser class of citizen, but he's just a neurodivergent man, because he's been affected by substances in the atmosphere, and it has made his neuro pathways less effective than other human beings. And it seems like it can happen to anyone. I know at some point Deckard is worried that it might begin to happen to him if he stays on Earth too long. And when you think about the fact that how we treated people that are neurodivergent at the time this book was written is very prophetic in that manner, that he has kind of seen into the future, and kind of seen this problem beforehand. And it makes me think that he's looking at the way that maybe JR experiences the world, and is that any less important than how Deckard experiences the world? Does he have any less of a right to life than Deckard does? Because they're almost seen, the people that have become mutated by the effects of the war, as similar to androids, and maybe that their right to life isn't as kind of holy as everyone else's are. And that's really interesting, because obviously JR has a different experience to Deckard, and a different reaction to androids as Deckard as well. He has more, in a way, he has more empathy, because even though he is not as advanced as Deckard, towards the androids. And that's super interesting. But mercerism I've got to speak about, because for me, like, I felt like mercerism was, again, it's a very clever social commentary on how Christianity was being used at the time, like commercially. People were going and preaching on TV, or going and holding events and trying to drum up money using Christianity. Because I feel like Mercer is going through trials similar to what Jesus did before he was crucified, and it's a way of, like, basically no one's following Islam anymore, no one's following Christianity anymore, but guess what, we've got this other thing for you, mercerism. Strap a VR kind of set to yourself, and feel that empathy that you're supposed to feel through religion. But it's called mercerism, which makes me think initially of
Money.
two things: being commercial and being mercenary. And the fact it's kind of generated and plugged into people in a similar way to Buster Friendly, who's the only thing on TV, the only voice you can listen to in a very Orwellian fashion, makes me think that the whole thing is kind of a social commentary on subverted religion being used as a way of controlling the populace and getting people to feel and think in a certain way. And maybe the visions that Deckard is getting are maybe a purer form of that than what he's actually experiencing through the empathy box.
So it's almost saying that you're only human if you follow Mercer, if you use the empathy box. That's the way you're showing your humanity, by contributing to mercerism. Because the thing is, I noticed the difference is, like, Deckard is really disjointed. He basically looks upon the androids as things. And that's the way he cuts himself off so he can do the job. Whereas if you get Phil Reich from the other one, he enjoys killing.
Yeah, but that's a strange emotion for an android, though, as well, isn't it? When you look at necessarily how the other Nexus 6 types act compared to Phil.
See, that's the argument. So that almost goes to the arguments that actually in the film, how do you define what is human?
Mm.
You know, you're defining that something that's an android, but it is in some way, it's getting joy out of killing a form of empathy for him as a android.
Mm.
But
And
yeah,
I think the movie does a really good job at the end of exploring how the real worry in mortality is the loss of shared experience, similar to the empathy box. So, like Roy
yes,
Batty is trying to tell Deckard at the end, you've not seen the things I've seen. It's impossible
yeah,
for you to see them because I've been able to go places where humans have not been able to because
yeah,
of radiation and
mm,
and you know and
mm,
vacuum of space and what have you. And I've managed to see things that I want to leave behind. I want people to have seen what I've seen, what my eyes have seen, and my memories, and that kind of loss of consciousness stream as a kind of as a fear factor for mortality for the androids is
yeah,
exactly the same principle that is in the humans, and I felt like that was explored by Dick in the book, but he
mm.
doesn't slap you over the head with these things. He hides everything. Everything in this book is hidden behind some kind of madness. He just he plants seeds. And he just sees whether or not you'll kind of cotton on and they'll germinate and build into something. But in the movie, they're much more obvious. Clearly, Ridley Scott understood the book because he's taken a lot of these concepts, he's reduced them and made them more simple, and he's shoved them in the audience's face a lot.
I don't know. I could be quoting out of thing. I have a feeling Ridley Scott didn't read the book. He just went by the
That's
script.
crazy to me because whoever wrote the screenplay, it's been so well adapted by the
Yeah.
director to the screen. You would assume that he must have read the book and the screenplay, not just the screenplay. Because
I will have to look it up, but I have a
yeah,
feeling he didn't read the book. He just went by the screenplay.
well, I'm telling you this: the adaptation to a screenplay was absolutely on the money then, because
Because
the
it was
working
David
relationship he
Peebles
must have had
did
with
it.
him.
They went through quite a few things. David Peebles and somebody else wrote the script
Mm.
initially, but the script went. The adaptation went. It had been in development various forms from about 1970, I think, and it went through various hands. It was called the Electric Toad at one point, I think. But it went through so many places before they'd adapted and got into a form that I think somebody thought they could film. And then I think it
Yeah.
was shown to Ridley Scott, and he looked at it and thought, okay, I can do that.
Mm.
But I
Yeah,
have a feeling if it'd been given to anybody else, they would have made such a mashup of it because the film is so subtle at points.
it feels to me, if you don't dig into the themes and you forget about all of the
Mm,
stream of consciousness stuff and the lived experience and are we
mm,
human, what makes us human, if you take away all the really important stuff in this book,
yeah,
it does feel a little bit like it's been extrapolated from 1984, in
yeah,
that a lot of it is very prophetic around what might happen if we have another world war, we colonize other planets,
mm,
if we abuse our environment and nature. um, Clearly the government here, or
yeah,
the driving force here, it is very controlling. It's very commercial. People are constantly signing up. You remember like
yeah,
radio rentals back in the day. It's basically
yeah.
they've got radio rentals, but for animals, effectively,
Yes,
in this. And the talk about have you got the latest sheep or horse that your neighbor has? It's very keeping up with the Joneses. It's very
yeah. I always think it's quite
commercial.
interesting that he has a sheep to start with, which is obviously an electric sheep, and they pretend it's real because when he's talking to his neighbor, they said, "Well, I thought you already had a sheep." When he says, "I
Mm,
bought a goat," he goes, "I thought you already had a sheep," and he goes, and then he admitted that it's electric, and the guy was like,
yeah,
"Oh, I feel really sorry for you."
yeah,
The fact
that's
that you
right.
had an electric sheep and you had to fake it, as you said, it's consumerism in some way,
Hmm.
you know. Uh,
It is consumerism, but also, like you said at the start, when you recapped it, it's like he has to kill, right? And we've already established at this point
mm,
that the androids are effectively sentient beings. He
yeah,
has to commit murders
uh,
to be able to get a better upgrade on his animal to sit on his roof. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it is amazingly, tongue-in-cheek social commentary on the direction of the time of mostly the Western world.
Yeah.
The fact that someone might go out there and be like, do you know what? I'm going to make sure I do at least 5 murders so I can, get a live goat rather than an electric sheep for my roof is so funny. It's hilarious when you think about it.
Yeah. See, I always argue about older books that they don't. This idea that books date.
Mm.
I'm always against it because it's always within the world of the person who's created, no matter what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But Philip K. Dick reads like a. If it was released now, it would read like a book written now.
Yeah. Oh, this reads like a dream. This reads so fast. It's so sharp.
Because
it's so
he's
funny.
not very prosy. He's not very flowery with his prose or anything.
No.
He's just really straightforward. It's all very straightforward, and I think that's the argument because it's more about the ideas than it is about the language.
It reads to me. It reads like obviously an author that sells very well in science fiction currently, Blake Crouch. It reads like a Blake Crouch book, like it was written like last year or something. But it's just so much better. His mind's working on such a level, I think, beyond most authors. It's there are authors that work at that level. And I understand why so many people that are science fiction fans get frustrated that their genre doesn't get treated with the same respect, maybe as a literary fiction or historical fiction, because clearly some of these authors are working at a level cognitively that the greatest authors were as well.
Yeah, it's not as bad as it used to be. It used to be like in the 70s and 80s, science fiction was very looked down upon, and well, not totally looked down upon, but the bits of it was thought of as a lesser genre. And I think nowadays, because of the way a lot of it's gone into popular media, it's looked at a lot better, but they're still looked out as more of a popcorn thing. I adore Star Wars, but it is popcorn. It is science fantasy more than anything else. It is not heavy science fiction. So a lot of people who don't read science fiction look at science fiction like that, or they even superhero films. That's generally science fiction, really. That's what they look at, and they don't realise the sort of literary bits behind it, which in some ways, I guess, is why authors such as Margaret Atwood try to sort of distance themselves from that label by calling themselves speculative fiction, which I said is a term that's been around for decades, and they normally it encompasses a bit of fantasy and stuff. I really get confused by them. But yeah, I think that's why some people try to sort of distance themselves from the term. But I say just embrace it and go with it.
Yeah, definitely. There's nothing in this novel that that kind of Philip K. Dick explores that any difference to say like a Steinbeck or Dostoevsky. He just does it in a different medium. It's batshit crazy, and it might make it less appealing to a wider audience. But there's nothing in here that isn't as clever and as well thought out. I absolutely love the book. It's a 5-star read. If you haven't already figured out, you should definitely stop watching us. You need to read this book and you need to watch Blade Runner because they are excellent pieces of media.
Yeah, I said I always argue that Blade Runner is not a good adaptation of the book, but it is, and it's not. It does its own. It does what all good adaptations should do, which is do its own thing. Take the general themes and work with them.
Yeah, well, I'm going to make a very reductive comment on that. This book has 40% of Blade Runner in it. Blade Runner has 80% of this book in it. It's like 80% of Blade Runner wouldn't exist without this book, but you can fit about 40% of Blade Runner into this book because there's a lot that is covered in this novel that is just not in the movie at all. There's a lot of themes, there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of scenes you just will not experience unless you read the book. But if you read the book, you will get 80% of watching a Blade Runner, but you won't get the other 20%, the visual adaptation, the additional noir and the sounds. Like it's a very well it's a very well crafted piece of media. Blade
And
Runner.
actually, if nobody's read it, as with all Philip K. Dick, they're pretty short books. You're talking 120, 150 pages or something like that. So,
I mean, this copy's trade paperback. It's 210. 210.
200, yeah. A lot of this stuff, though, is about 150 pages. But you find a lot of authors around about that period, a lot of their, especially science fiction authors, a lot of their books was that sort of length, which is why. But it's really easy. Yeah, I can read it within about a couple of days quite easily. I've read it so many times.
Definitely.
But even as a new
I read it
reader,
over about 2.5 days.
Yeah.
And I was working quite solidly during that time, so I was just like, every time I had a spare second, pick it up and read a couple of chapters.
There's a bit, as in all Philip K. Dick books, that you think, okay, that's it's all gone. As I always say, it goes all Philip K. Dick, and which means it just goes off on one. Starts off with something vaguely normal, and then and for me, it's the police station, the second police station.
Oh, I loved it though, because for me, the parallels with Harrison Ford start because my first thought was, when I was reading those scenes, it made me think of the movie Frantic.
Yes.
Harrison Ford, how this initial paranoia wave hits the reader of like, wait a second, everything I've been reading, is any of it real?
Yeah.
Is this guy an android that I've been reading along with? Are these guys androids? Why don't they know what is going on? Why doesn't anyone know who he is? Why is there a second police station? And why do the two police stations and the people inside them know nothing about each other? How has this happened? And that initial paranoia wave made me think immediately of the movie Frantic, which obviously also had Harrison Ford in it, and literally came out 2 years after Blade Runner. So that threw me in, completely.
Yeah, you find that in quite a few. I said there's always a section in books that seem to do that. Oh, they seem very normal. The Man in the High Castle, most of it feels very normal, but there's bits of it that you think, yeah, what's going on here? So what's your next Dick book going to be?
I'm open to suggestions, because here's the thing. I'm thinking I should try to put a science fiction book that's not Dick in between two Dick books, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that the book A Roadside Picnic was adapted into the movie Stalker, because I've seen the movie Stalker and I love that movie, and I did not realize that was based on Roadside Picnic. So I might have to do that one next to see, wait a sec, what's my experience like between androids and Blade Runner and Roadside Picnic and Stalker? Because in both cases I saw the movies before I read the books, and I want to see how these experiences tally up. And then, to be fair with Dick, I was probably going to ask someone who's more experienced, like yourself. Look, if you had to choose between Man in the High Castle, Scanner Darkly, and Ubik, which of those three would you run with next?
I would probably, between Man in High Castle and Scanner Darkly, I would probably go for. You've seen the film of Scanner Darkly, haven't you?
I have.
Yeah, so I'd go for Man in the High Castle.
Yeah, cool. I've got a lovely hardback of that, so I'll definitely be interested to give that a read.
And it reads, in some ways, it feels a lot more like a normal book, as much as it can do.
That's good, because that book's also my 50 books to read before I'm 50 as well. So that's two birds with one stone there.
Yeah, but that's probably what I would go for next. I need to go off and read some more Philip K. Dick.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, this is the problem. We talk about these things, and all of a sudden, you realise you just picked up Wheel of Time, or you've just picked up a science fiction book when you're in the middle of reading a fantasy book. There you go.
I've read. I've not read everything Dick has done, but I've got a couple. I've read a lot of it. I've got Dr. Futurity, which is one I've not read, which I keep meaning to read. So
yeah, I mean, it's one of those books we could talk about it for hours and hours. I think we've got a good 40 minutes of content in there. But it's one of those, like I say, I think there's like 20 chapters in this book, and every chapter is its own theme, and it's extremely deep. So if anyone hasn't read it, please don't take our word for it. Just read it and make up your own mind.
Yeah, and if Al's up to it, once he reads High Castle, we'll do another one of these.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we can.
Because there's lots of stuff in there to go on, especially if not have yeah, you wouldn't have seen the film. You probably wouldn't have seen the TV series, which is vaguely.
No, I see. I had the TV series on my list of
Yeah,
shows.
you could watch a TV
but-
series and it wouldn't make much sense.
Yeah,
to you.
exactly. I don't want to touch it until I've read the book now, because
Yeah.
if I can avoid it, I would like to read the books before I watch any kind of visual media. It's just the case with Roadside Picnic. I've actually seen Stalker. I didn't realise the two were connected in any way.
So I think we will wrap up here if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So thank you
Thanks for having me again,
watching.
Duncan.
That's no problem. And we'll speak to everybody soon. So goodbye for the moment.
Bye bye.